Hello.
Hello.
So we have a very small group so far. We'll see if anybody else, we'll give them another minute or so to join us.
We always have late comers.
There's always a fashionably late.
There you go. Yeah. Our staff.
I'm emailing you guys that are on the call right now of the form right now from Lisa.
Another minute, then we'll get started. Kayla, your office looks like a psychologist's office with that giant couch. You know?
Oh my gosh, I know. I told Cheyenne, I was like, Cheyenne, I look like I'm a therapist. It's like, yeah, come lay down and tell me all of your problems.
You'll never get rid of agents now. They'll be in there the whole time.
I'm just gonna be ready for my broker's license because I'm gonna be like, hey, I know everything now.
Yeah, show me my office. All right, well, I guess we'll get started since there are a few of you that have made the time to join. I'm Lisa Sullivan. I'm your DB for the next week. And then Kristen Cole will be taking over as a designated broker. But while I'm still here, I wanted to do this class. And I think it's a really important one that a lot of people are not aware of. And your critical dates, there's a form that's put out by AAR that outlines all of your critical dates. And we're going to be going through that form today. This is a full participation class. I can't speak. Participation, did I say it right? Participation class. And you're welcome to interject or talk anytime you want. I prefer that, as a matter of fact, to do it more as a seminar interactive class versus just a lecture. Let's see. Can you pull it up on yours? Are you the host, Kayla?
Yeah, I'm sending it your way. Hold on.
Okay.
You should have sharing capability now.
Can you guys see that form?
No, we see your Zoom launch pad.
Not letting me. Great. Kayla, you want to host and put the form up?
Yeah, can you hand it back to me?
Yes.
It's those 3 dots on the right-hand side.
Yes. Maybe.
You might have to stop share first.
Yeah, okay. And then
I just sent everybody the form too.
okay. You are now the host.
Okay.
Sorry about that, guys. Technical difficulty. I've been in classes all morning and I'm about fried already, so I apologize.
All right, can you all see it?
Yep.
Cool.
Okay, so this is an AAR form. You can find it in both your .loop, your command, or your DocuSign account, or transaction desk. It's a 3-page form. It's put out, like I said, by AAR. It's updated periodically as the rules change. This one was last updated October 28th when the contract was revised, and we're due for another contract revision, so this form will be probably updated as well. The top part of the first page is really just information. This is a form just for you, by the way. It doesn't have to be turned in. It is strictly for your use. But you can put all of your information in there that has to do with your transaction so that it's readily accessible to you should you need it. And then, oh shoot, I can't, you're the host, so I can't scroll down. Sorry about that. You could go just to right there, perfect. So your critical dates are going to fluctuate based on the actual transaction dates that obviously that you have. You're going to have certain things that are non-negotiable, such as your mutual acceptance of the contract. That date when you deliver that contract or receive that contract, that will be your date completed. That will be your contract date. Earnest money, again, is upon acceptance. Most people don't realize that there's not a timeline in there anymore. It says upon acceptance. So you really need to make sure that that earnest money is deposited the next business day by the end of that business day. And the other thing for this form, sorry, I'm jumping all over the place today. If anything that says CN next to it over here, it is going to be something that you can issue a cure notice on. These are contract items that in order to stay on contract or in a timely manner, that you need to issue a cure notice if the other party does not provide that in a timely manner. So for instance, your earnest money, if you're the buyer's agent, you need to get that into escrow by the end of that first business day. If you're the seller's agent and the buyer's agent doesn't perform by the end of that, in the beginning of the second business day, you're going to issue a cure notice to get them back on track. Contracts now are not automatically canceled without a cure notice. They don't have any provision in there to just stop. So the only way they can stop is if you issue a cure notice and the other party doesn't cure that breach, then the non-breaching party can cancel. Does that make sense to anybody? Questions? One thing I didn't ask is how many of you are new to the business? Everybody. Okay, so this may be going a little bit faster than you need to go. Did any of you take the contract class last week? Yes, okay. And
Yeah, we took it.
okay, you guys can unmute too, since there's only 5 of us. You're welcome to stay unmuted the whole time, and then you can speak as you need to.
Okay.
When we get a bunch, it gets complicated, but right now there's not very many. So one of the things I can't stress enough is how important it is to know your contract inside and out. We've talked about that. Know the 9 different sections of your contract, know what they're for, know your dates within that. But if you don't know anything at all, if you've never even looked at a contract and you have this form, you'll know what dates things have got to be performed. So that's why it's so important to you to have this form, especially as a new agent. This is your Bible, for lack of a better word, that'll keep you on track and make sure that you're performing to the best of your ability for your client. So again, and these dates and terms do not go in the same sequence as your contract. So you're going to have to learn. One of the things that I've done for myself when I was a new agent is where it says like earnest money, make sure that you look up in your contract what lines that'd be what section, where it is in the contract, so that you know where to look for that in your actual contract. So again, we'll talk about cure notices in a moment. No one's issued a cure notice at this point of the newer agents? Do you all know what that form? Okay, that's a separate form that gives the non-breaching party the right to cancel a contract based on something that the other party did not do. For instance, if the earnest money was not deposited and you represent the seller and the buyer's just hanging out there, not putting that money into escrow, your client's calling you and saying, are they going to perform? Are they going to do it? And you're like, I don't know, because as a new agent, you don't know. What you can do then is you can cure that other party by issuing a cure notice that says you have 3 calendar days to deposit that earnest money, where the seller has the right to cancel the contract. And that gives that seller that right to get out and move on to the next buyer if this one's not going to perform. Without that form being issued, you do not have that right. You would just hang out. And if you wait too long, one of the things I hear quite often is agents don't want to be rude. They think it's rude to issue a cure notice. It is not meant to be rude. It's meant to be a gentle nudge to get you back on track. So if you use it that way from the beginning and you set the tone for the way the transaction is going to roll out, the other agent is going to respect you and understand that they better perform, or you're going to be on your ball and you're going to make sure that things happen the way they're supposed to happen. So if you issue a cure notice for the earnest money, if it's not deposited, I guarantee you your contract timeline is going to go more smoothly after that, because the other agent's aware that you know the contract. And you're going to find out, unfortunately, that there are so many agents that don't. And again, that's where your brokerage staff can come in to help you with that kind of information if you need it. So 3 days after contract acceptance, a buyer has got to provide the lender with information for their loan application. That's a contract that's in section 2 of your contract. Once you know what date your contract is accepted, within 3 days, you can write this date. That's the due date. They can do it on day 1. That's okay. So you're going to write down the due date, which would be 3 days after contract acceptance, and then the date they actually complete that. Obviously, you don't want to go into day 4 because then you're subject to a cure notice from the other side. So just keep track of that. And again, communication is key with all parties, but make sure you understand that your client has obligations to perform, not just you. And that's a conversation you have to have with them. Make sure that they know that there are timelines that they're obligated to by signing that contract, and that you're going to make sure that they abide by them. And so you're not going to at 5 o'clock on day 3 say, oh, wait, we're going to have to provide the lender with certain information for our loan application. The day the contract's accepted, you're going to let your buyer know within this 3-day period, we're going to have to do this, or else you're in breach of contract. Make sense to everybody? Yeah, okay. Okay, also within 3 days after contract acceptance, the buyer has to grant the lender permission to access the buyer's credit report. This is usually done at the same time as the items in line 3. But again, the buyer has to do that. If you look at your pre-qualification form, which of course we don't have in front of us today, the very bottom of the pre-qualification form, when the buyer signs that, it is granting the lender permission to do some of these things. And that will serve as notice for this and satisfy this portion of the contract. Also, 3 days after contract acceptance, the seller has to provide to the buyer the seller property disclosure statement. This is, sometimes agents think that by having it in the agent remarks or the forms portion of the MLS, that's considered delivery. It is not. Even if it's in there, you must physically deliver that to the agent, either via email, fax, or hand delivery, hopefully email nowadays. And if that is not received by you by the end of the business on the 3rd day, by 11:59 p.m. on the 3rd day, then you, on day 1 or day 4, you'll need to cure the other party so that your client's timeline stays in effect. One thing you'll see is a pattern too. You're going to see 3, 5, 10 as your most common dates or common timeline periods. And that's been kind of the patterns over the last probably 15 or 20 years. Prior to that, when I started like 27 years ago, 30 days was pretty normal for almost everything. Everything's been shortened up and solidified and speeded up due to the ability to do so many things electronically nowadays. Back in the day, we used to have to physically hand deliver every document back and forth for signatures, for escrow, for inspections, for everything was done by hand. And when I first started, even fax machines, and God, I'm saying it's old, but even fax machines were really, really bad. They had that thermal paper and they took forever to transmit. It was all done on dial-up modems and stuff like that. So it was faster to get in your car and drive quite often than it was to try to do things via fax. So anyway, now they've shortened the timelines up quite a bit because of the ease of use. But don't let that fool you. You're still obligated to do your job. If you can't do something electronically, you need to do it in person. And I think that is where so many agents now fail. They don't think about that. They think, well, I can't log into my computer, so I can't write that contract. Yes, you can. You just have to go about it a different way. So one of the things I strongly suggest is that you have a hard copy of every form available to you on your computer or in your car or in a folder, so that when you run into that situation, we all have technical problems. You have the ability to continue to do your job, because the timeline doesn't stop just because the computer failed or you can't log in or something happens to your phone. Nobody cares. Unfortunately, contract law doesn't care. Okay, back to the SPUDs. Once the seller is obligated to deliver the SPUDs to the buyer, but the buyer's not obligated to do anything with it. So that's something that you need to be aware of. we as brokers ask for a signed copy in the file. For the buyer, if you actually read the seller property disclosure statement and the contract, the buyer's under no obligation to do anything with that. All they have to do is receive it. But once you do get it, make sure that the buyer then has 10 days to review it, or the end of the inspection period. So make sure that they do take a look at that form. And if there's a lot of blank spaces, ask for the seller to clarify that in writing. This is, again, your obligation as a buyer's agent at that point. Make sure that those are done. And if you are on the seller's side, make sure that you do all of the things that are required as a seller's agent. Ask your seller to complete that form. Make sure you never touch it yourself. But make sure that the seller does it to the best of their ability, that if they don't know an answer, mark, I don't know. If they do know, to be completely factual and honest about it. Again, with those forms, if the seller is less than honest, I guess or lying sounds really harsh, but if they're less than honest or not completely forthcoming with some information that you know that they know, it's your obligation then as a licensed realtor in Arizona to disclose that information to the other party. And for that you would use a disclosure notification form. So don't think you're off the hook if your clients lie. If you know about it, you're on the hook for it as well. Okay, the insurance claims history, that is due 5 days after contract acceptance. And that is a loss history report of the property that is to be provided by the seller. Most agents think that it needs to be provided by a licensed insurance professional, and it doesn't. That's a courtesy. If you have an agent or an insurance agent that will provide that, that's fantastic. But if they won't, it's the seller's obligation to write a letter that says whether they've had any claims in the last 5 years or whether they haven't. Sometimes they don't have insurance in place. I had a property one time of my own that was only worth $30,000 as a rental property. This was obviously a while ago. And I didn't have any homeowners insurance in place because frankly, if the thing burned down, I didn't care. It was not, it wasn't that, it wasn't like a slumlord thing, but it wasn't, the cost of the insurance was so high that it wasn't worth it to me to put it in place. I would, at that cost, I would just rebuild it or whatever. So you don't have to have insurance in place if there's not a loan. So in that situation, I would have just written a letter as a seller that said, I've had no claims in the last 5 years, and that would satisfy that requirement. Again, it's a curable item. If the seller did not provide that to you, to the buyer within 5 days after contract acceptance, you can cure them and get them back on track with that. And you all know how contract timelines work, right? Is everybody aware of that? Pretty much, okay. The date it's signed is not the date, not the contract acceptance date, unless that is also the date it was delivered to all parties. So if you, for instance, say you're representing a seller, you receive a contract at 10 o'clock on Wednesday night, and your client signs it, and you think, yeah, I'm going to go to bed. I don't want to, I'll send this out to the agent tomorrow. That's not acceptance. Delivery constitutes acceptance. So until you have physically sent that out, emailed it, faxed, hand delivered to the other party, your timeline does not start. In that situation, you've given up 1 day of your client's time by doing that. And until you deliver that other party has the option to withdraw that offer. So be very cautious about that. The minute it's signed, get it out of your hands and deliver to the other agent to start your timelines and to make sure that your contract is actually accepted. So we're going to assume that the day it's signed is delivered. That's day 0. Day 1 would be the next day, starting at 12:01 a.m. or 12 a.m. And so again, if you signed it at 11:30 p.m. at 12 o'clock at midnight, 12:01 a.m., that would become day 1. Doesn't seem fair, but it is, that's the law. Any questions so far on timelines or what we've gone through so far? No? Okay.
No, not yet.
Not yet. If you do, just jump in.
I will.
I have a quick question.
Okay.
Okay, so I've been in real estate for 2 years, but I'm coming from a different state.
Yeah.
So on our contracts, we were able to write in a time also, not just the date? So like we could say 5 p.m. on this date. Does that happen in these contracts as well or not?
For the offer or for the acceptance?
For just dates throughout the contract? For
No.
acceptance and
Well,
other dates as well?
Yeah, so what you would write when you're writing an actual contract to purchase, you're writing the purchase contract, there is a finite date that say 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time would be your date that the offer is good through. If the other party accepts it prior to that, they still have to sign it and deliver it back to you. So you may not get it back until 6 p.m., but it's technically not, it's dead at that point unless it's delivered. So if you're representing the seller and you get one that's due at 5 p.m., you need to make sure that you get it signed and back to them before 5 p.m. or that contract's technically dead. In that situation, the buyer would need to initiate an addendum extending that time for acceptance, or you don't have a valid contract. So
Thank
you. You're welcome. All right, HOA. Oops, okay, loan estimate. Okay, loan estimate, the buyer is to receive a loan estimate. Usually that's within 5 days of contract acceptance. They have to have it by day 10. And again, it's not a curable item. That is just something you need to be aware of for your buyer. HOA. The seller has to notify the HOA of a pending sale within 5 days of contract acceptance. We don't normally do that here. The escrow officer will be the one that initiates that interaction with the HOA. But what the seller does have to do is provide you with a form that tells you what the costs are of that HOA and you negotiate the transfer fees and things like that at contract. So again, this is something that you're contractually obligated to do this, but quite often it's done by the escrow officer. But it doesn't alleviate the seller from the responsibility. If the escrow officer doesn't do that, then the seller is liable for that, and the seller still needs to make sure it gets done. Questions on that? No? Okay. HOA disclosures. There is a huge, this page 2 of your HOA addendum tells all of the obligations of the seller and buyer as far as what they're obligated to receive and who needs to provide that information. If there's less than 50 units, they have 10 days after. And same thing with 50 or more units. They used to have different timelines based on the number of units, but now that all the HOAs are pretty much standardized as far as what they provide, you're not going to usually have a problem receiving it. Where you have a problem is if there's a neighborhood managed HOA. Sometimes you have problems getting the documents in a timely manner with that. If it's a professionally managed HOA, you're probably going to be fine. So be aware of that when you're writing your contract. Kind of just have an idea of how it's managed. Look at your HOA form. It has one of the lines on there asks the seller to provide the management contact. If it's one of the neighbors, that might be a red flag that you may have a little bit of difficulty getting things in a timely manner. But again, it doesn't negate any of the contract obligations. The seller is still obligated to get that information to the buyer within that time period. So just stay on top of that also. Again, those are curable items. So if you don't receive it, send that nudge to the other party to allow them to get their client back on track. It gives them those 3 days to get that client back on track and keep your contract going. The LSU is a contract requirement, and it is usually provided on day 10 of the contract acceptance by the buyer's loan officer. If you are working with an out-of-state lender, they don't always like to use Aar Forms because Aar Forms in Arizona are extremely detailed and have a lot of information on there that they may not even be aware of. So what you can do in that situation is if you're working with, say, Navy Fed or USAA, or mostly it's military lenders that are out of state because they work with so many people, provide them with a copy of our form at the beginning. When your buyer is getting approved or pre-approved, have a dialogue with that loan officer and say, these are forms that we're going to be required for our contract in Arizona. Will you have any problem providing these to me? 99% of the time, they're not going to have a problem. When they have a problem is when on day 10, you call them and you say, I need this for my client for our contract, and they have no idea what you're talking about. So again, have that open conversation with them, make sure that they're aware of it. If you work with a lot of military buyers and sellers, you're going to experience this. So get a heads up on it. Make sure you understand those forms. Your LSU in Arizona, your loan status update, has a lot of information on it that you need. One of the things it has is on the bottom of that form, there's a signature line that says that the buyer is committing to that lender, which satisfies one of your contract requirements. You're 10 days after contract acceptance, your buyer has got to commit to a lender and say, we're going forward with this transaction. And you can do that in writing, or you can just have them sign the LSU, and that takes care of that obligation for you. It's spelled out very clearly on that. So if you haven't yet done that, read your AAR pre-qual form, read your AAR LSU form, and read all of the things that is provided to you on those forms. It's pretty enlightening. The other thing, as an agent, when you get an LSU from your lender, read it, look at that, and see if there's anything that's missing, or you see something on there that you weren't aware of. That's a disclosure item. And if there's information that's incorrect, you have got to get that corrected. I had one not too long ago where it was, I thought, a single buyer, but on the LSU, it mentioned a spouse. There's a heads up, right? What might you need in that situation? Is there a divorce happening? Is a party deployed? This was a military couple. Are they going to buy it as sole and separate? In which case, they're going to need a disclaimer deed from the party that's not on the contract. Those are all things that you need to disclose to the other side, because it could potentially alter the outcome of your deal. So just be aware of that, read that. Also, if, for instance, you don't think that it's contingent upon the sale of another property or some other factor, but on your LSU, it says it's contingent upon the sale of another home that you weren't aware of, there's a red flag. You're gonna have to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to fix that. I see Nicole nodding. Yeah, she's probably had that happen before. So those are things that you need to look at. Look at, say you didn't ask for any concessions, because right now it's not as common as it was a year or so ago to ask for concessions, but on your LSU, it says that the buyer is relying on concessions to close this transaction, but you didn't ask for any. There's a red flag. Your deal's not going to close. So just read it through pretty carefully. And if there's any missing items, you can ask the lender to clarify those. If the lender will not provide that, the buyer's able to provide that information. They just need to be completely honest and factual. So if you're working with a lender that absolutely refuses to provide that form, and you're contractually obligated to provide it to the other party, the buyer can fill that out and sign it. And then you can provide that to the other party. But just make sure they're aware that anything they put on that form, they're obligated to. Okay. Any questions on LSU or HOA disclosures? Nope. Okay. All right. So the any items disapproved on the SPUDs, the buyer has 5 days to respond to the SPUDs and say, I disapprove of this item, or at the end of their inspection period. So there's a timeline there. Where you run into a problem is if, say for instance, the seller did not provide the SPUDs in the 3-day period that you were required, that's required by contract law. You've cured them. They didn't respond for some reason. The buyer doesn't want to cancel the contract, so you're just keep trying to get that form from the seller's agent. They finally provide it to you, let's say 3 days before closing. The buyer legally has 5 days to dispute anything on that form. You literally could be out of contract dates if there's a problem. So make sure you don't lose track of those timelines. Normally you have it in a timely manner. You're going to have whatever your normal due diligence period is. And at the end of that due diligence period is when they've got to respond to any disapproved items on the SPUDs. Same thing with insurance claims history. That's provided 5 days after close of, after contract acceptance. They have 5 days again to respond to any issues with that, or the end of their inspection period. And I don't like it called inspection. It's really to be due diligence. It's because it's not just inspections. This is your due diligence of the property, You're looking at every single thing, any facet of that property that the buyer wants to look into, not just inspections. Homeowners insurance. Again, the buyer needs to apply for homeowners insurance during their due diligence or inspection period. Otherwise, if they can't secure that prior to close of escrow, they can't cancel based on that. We've had, or the cost of it or things like that. Again, with our fires last year, some insurance for properties went up astronomically at the Catalina foothills, for instance. Some of them couldn't even secure insurance for a while because they were worried about both the fires and potential flooding afterwards. So this is something that's really important for your buyers to make sure that they investigate the cost and the accessibility of their insurance during their inspection period. And again, termite reports or wood infestation reports. Those used to be mandated by a lender. Most lenders required them. Now it's some do, some don't. But again, it's something for your buyer to take into consideration, as most properties in Arizona either have had or will have termites at some point. It's pretty critical that they have a termite or wood infestation inspection. And again, that's something that they need to do during their inspection period. Now, if you notice, items 11 through 14, none of these are curable items. They're just contract timelines. So even though they're required to be performed in a certain time period, these are not things you can cancel or cure on to keep the contract going. They're obligations on the part of the parties. Can you scroll down for me, Kayla? Thank you. Okay, items again, 15 through 17 again have to do with the due diligence or inspection period. The inspection period notice is the BINSR. I don't know why they don't just call the BINSR on here, but that's what it is. Buyer's inspection and seller's response, basically. They must provide that to the seller at the end of their inspection period. Normally, the contract boilerplate is 10 days, but you can do obviously any negotiated time. If you miss that, your buyer has just accepted the property in its as-is condition. No, the seller's under no obligation at all to respond. If I just had this happen as a broker a couple of days ago, the buyer's agent called and said, oopsies, we screwed up our dates. We just submitted this giant laundry list of repairs to the seller on day 11. They won't respond to it. I said, they don't have to. You just obligated yourself to those probably. The seller's under no obligation to do anything. You've pretty much given up your buyer's rights to anything. They've accepted the property. And if you can negotiate anything at this point, good for you, but you may be buying all those items. So make sure you understand that. A verbal negotiation of those time periods doesn't extend it. Only a written negotiation does extend that. If you count wrong, which is what happened in this one, they thought they took Christmas off. There's nothing in our contract that says that a holiday doesn't count. You've got to know your contract again. They just, not only did they screw their client potentially out of some repairs, they've also now lost probably their client's faith in their ability to do a good job. And do you think that client's going to be scrutinizing everything they do from there on? You bet. One other misstep and they're probably going to sue you, or at the very least file an ethics complaint against you or the brokerage. So be really cautious about that. One small screw up can affect the entire transaction and your reputation, because they're the ones that are going to post on Facebook. They're the ones that are they're not going to remember all the wonderful things you did. They're going to remember that one bad thing, and they're going to tell everybody about that. So just be super cautious about that. I'm assuming you're all going to do it on time. So once you do deliver that inspection period notice, the BINSR, to the seller, they have 5 days after receipt to respond. They can respond in 3 ways. They can say, yep, we'll do it all. They're going to say, nope, we're not doing anything. Or they can say, we're going to do these items that we choose to do. Okay. If they say we're doing it all, that's fantastic. You're done. They do the repairs. Everybody's happy. Buyer doesn't have to respond at all. If they say we're going to do nothing, The buyer then has a chance to respond. They have 5 days to respond to the seller's response, and they have 2 choices. They can accept the seller's response or they can cancel. That's it. The inspection notice, the BINSR, each side gets 1 bite of the apple, so to speak. The buyer has 1 chance, 1 only, to provide information to the seller saying, I want this or done. The seller has 1 chance only to respond to the buyer saying, I'll do it or I won't do it based on these items. Then the buyer has 1 chance only to say, I'm going to accept what you said or I'm done. That's it. It's so simple, and people mess that one up constantly. But the timelines, again, are critical. The buyer's failure to deliver it says, I'm accepting the property as is. The seller's failure to deliver is different. It says, we're not doing anything. So it's the opposite of the buyer. And then if the buyer doesn't respond to what the seller said, they're accepting whatever the seller said and they're moving forward. So it's just kind of odd. There's no reason anybody shouldn't respond to any of these timelines. But if they don't, there's contract language written in there that says what happens if they don't. Any questions on that? No? Okay. And again, none of these are curable because none of them affect the contract timelines. The inspection period notice is literally a discussion item between buyer and seller, but it has no contract. You cannot change or alter the contract based on a BINSR. So you can't do a price reduction. You can't do a credit. All you can do is all it is a negotiation for repairs. Okay, item line 18, the buyer is to provide the lender with notice of intention to proceed 10 days after loan commitment, basically, or loan, I can't think of the right word right now, where they give you all the costs. I'm sorry, my brain is dead here. Again, that's your LSU. The bottom of the LSU, when you sign that, gives that notice of intention to proceed. If they don't want to sign the bottom of the LSU for some reason, then you have to, in writing, provide that information to the lender. And again, that's a curable item. If you were representing the seller and the buyer is not provided you with the LSU that's signed or a letter that says that they've committed to the lender, you cure them because you can't protect your seller if you don't know if the buyer has a lender in place and where they are within that loan process. So that's a really critical form that agents overlook all of the time. And again, item 19, the buyer is required to provide the lender with all signed disclosures and documentation listed in LSU 10 days after receipt. So there's certain things that the lender must have from the buyer. Permission, obviously, to pull their credit report, their tax returns, probably their W-2s. They may have to have something that shows that they've closed on a property. That there may be something where they have to have a letter for gift funds. Whatever is required by the lender to be provided has to be provided to the buyer. The buyer has to provide that to the lender within 10 days of contract acceptance or after the loan commitment. And that's a curable item as well. Title commitment, HOA documents. People tend to run these together and they're not the same. Your title commitment is provided to you by your title company. Don't forget, escrow and title are different. Your escrow officer is the one that facilitates your sale. They're the neutral third party that kind of puts everything together. The title company is the one that actually does the research on the title, the property, to make sure that it can be conveyed clearly. If there's any defects, if there's any encumbrances that need to be cleared up prior to transfer of title. So they're 2 separate things. Once you do receive the title commitment from the title company, the buyer has 5 days from receipt of that to cancel the contract based on any information found in there. For instance, say they look at it and there's a cloud on the title that they couldn't clear. There's some things that happened way back when where somehow the property wasn't transferred cleanly. The buyer has the right to cancel based on that information. What if there's a requirement for them to do something that they don't want to do, like pay off something, or if there's a tax lien or things like that, then they could cancel based on that. It doesn't have to be what you consider a valid reason. It just has to be whatever the buyer thinks is reasonable. So if there's anything at all in there that they disagree with, the 5 days from receipt, the buyer could cancel on that. And there will be times, believe it or not, where that that ability to cancel on your title report saves your rear end. Maybe the buyer has had some second thoughts. You can never obviously help a buyer breach a contract, but you can certainly help them cancel based on contract terms and obligations. So be aware of the difference there. Disapproval of HOA documents, that's again 5 days after receipt of those. They may not be at the same time as a title commitment. CC&Rs can come in different times than the title commitment as well. So each of those start a different timeline for cancellation if the buyer disapproves of any items in there. Some of the biggest ones in our area are street parking and basketball hoops, believe it or not. Those are two of the biggest ones that people cancel on, even though you would think that that's not maybe something of that great importance. It is if, like in my situation, we had 4 teenagers at the same time and 2 adults. We had 6 cars. If we weren't able to park in our driveway or in the street, we wouldn't have been able to function. So that was, for us, was very important. We lived in acreage, so it didn't matter. But if we wanted to move into a neighborhood, that would have been something we looked at. Some neighborhoods don't allow street parking. Where I live now, they don't allow street parking, but you can park in your driveway. Some don't allow parking in your driveway. You must have all cars in an enclosed garage. That's a hardship for a lot of people because then you know, most of us use our garage for storage, unfortunately. If you can't park your cars in there, what are you going to do? You're probably not going to live there. So that might be something, again, for a buyer to cancel on. Also, for, again, basketball hoops, for whatever reason, seems to be a hot button. A lot of them will not allow you to put a freestanding one in your yard or even one on your home. Trying to think of what other things can you guys think of off the top of your heads for HOA disapproval that you've had? Anybody think of anything? No?
Maybe just the price.
Of the HOA, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
It's
again,
really-
you should have had that notice. I'm sorry, Stephen, do you have something to say?
Oh, I just said there's some really high ones out there.
Yeah, yeah. And again, that's your HOA disclosure document when you negotiate your contract. It's your job, well, it's actually the buyer's job, but your job to help them verify whether or not the amount that the seller told you is correct. You couldn't necessarily cancel on that if you've already negotiated that in your contract and you're aware of those costs. That may not be a valid reason to cancel. But at that point, talk to the broker and we can help you figure out a way that would be advantageous to your client to do that. And again, none of these are curable. So make sure that that you follow the timelines, but it's not something that the other side can cure you on. It's basically benefits only one side of the equation, in this case, the buyer. Again, the buyer's homeowner's insurance needs to be placed by close of escrow. Buyer should perform a walkthrough. That is critical. Again, it's not a contract requirement. It is a brokerage requirement that you at least have them sign the form. Did they do one? Did they not do one? And if they did one, are there any items that need to be cured that weren't satisfied prior to closing? The closing disclosure needs to be signed 3 days prior to close of escrow. If that is not signed and delivered to escrow 3 days prior to close of escrow, then that is an issue. You can't close escrow unless that's delivered. So that is something, even though in here it says it's not a curable item, it is really a curable item. If they don't deliver that notice of, like for instance, the notice of PTD, loan approval without conditions, and a CD, you can cure on that. So those are items to look carefully at, make sure those get there. Don't do the thing that we see agents doing all the time. Don't be nice. Don't be nice about timelines at the end. They're like, oh, the other party said that they're working on it. They're going to have it there. Not to worry, everything's going to be fine. It's not. If it wasn't there 3 days prior to close of escrow, you cannot close. You've just screwed your client over. Make sure that you get that information in there. And if you don't, you must cure so that you can extend that timeline legally. Excuse me. What else? Let's see. Again, those 3 days prior to closing are critical. You've got to, do your loan approval. If it's a cash deal, you need to make sure that the funds are available, readily available funds, that the seller's completed any repairs and that you have the receipts. If you don't, the middle section of your walkthrough acts as a cure for that. On there, you write on there, seller to provide receipts of repairs to buyer, and then they have 3 days to do that. That actually stays in effect after closing so that that cure does not get breached. In that situation though, I would highly suggest that you make sure those repairs were done. If not, you're gonna probably be in trouble as a buyer's agent. And recordation of documents, again, is close of escrow. That is when it's recorded at the county, not a moment before. Do not, under any circumstances, release the keys prior to close of escrow to recordation. If you do, you breach not only the contract, but ethics as well. And there could be serious consequences to you. There's nothing worse than, sorry, my story keeps going on. It's copying everything I'm seeing. There's nothing worse than getting a call from, as a seller's agent, from your client that says, I just went over to my house and just double checked and there's people in it. The buyer's agent has taken the keys out of the key box, given them to their buyer. The buyer is occupying the property and it's not legally theirs. You're scrambling then, trying to get them out, get your keys back. And don't forget, buyer and seller are mad at each other, but it's the agent's fault. It's not the client's fault. They don't know any better. So one of the things I suggest is the minute, have a conversation with the other party, first of all. Make sure that the other agent understands that they are not to take those keys for any reason, that you will provide those keys upon recordation. Ask them when they're going to do their walkthrough. The minute they do their walkthrough, take that key box off. Keep those keys in your possession. Then they can't take them out of the key box. If you go to take your key box off and the keys are missing, you find out who accessed it last and you call their broker and you make sure that there's some kind of discipline and get those keys back right away. At the worst case, if they've handed the keys out, you may have to call a locksmith to go over and change those locks. And you have to do whatever you need to do to protect your client if you're the seller, on the seller's side. On the buyer's side, you need to protect yourself and the client as well, and don't give them access to a property they don't own. Because I don't care what you tell them. You can say, oh yeah, I mean, obviously don't do this, but I've had agents said, but I just told them they could go in and put stuff in the garage, or I told them they could just go in and measure, but they don't. The minute they have the keys, they think it's theirs, and they can go in and alter the property. They can hurt themselves, in which case it's an obligation of the seller still. There are all kinds of things that those as brokers are that is one of the scariest times, is between everybody signing everything and recordation, because the buyer thinks they're done and the seller thinks they're done, but we know they're not. And just exercise a lot of caution to make sure that you keep track of those keys. And then at recordation, make sure you provide them timely. That may be that you drive over and meet your client if you're the buyer's agent and you let them in. Quite often, I do it with a gift basket or something. I want to be the one to welcome them to that home. There's nothing worse than going over there. You haven't made any arrangements to get the keys from the listing agent. And the listing agent is letting your buyers in and being, the one that greets them in their new home. It's super disappointing for me as an agent. And definitely that could have been stopped with a little conversation between you and the other agent as to how that's going to be handled. And again, the seller has to deliver all the existing keys. That is the home, security system, mailbox, pool, codes to work the Ring doorbell, to work your Nest thermostat. All of that stuff needs to be turned over to the buyer at close of escrow. So those are things you may be scrambling around to grab beforehand, but make sure you have them. It's the buyer's right to have those at close of escrow, and it's the seller's obligation to provide them. Kayla, can you scroll up a little bit, please? We're almost done. There you go. There's a few other obligations that aren't as common, but they're still required. and they're all curable. So your wastewater, we're running out of time, sorry, your solar, your well disclosures, all of those need to be provided timely, and there are contract timelines that talk about what has to be done and at what time frame. Your well registration has to be provided. Your on-site wastewater treatment facility must be inspected within 6 months prior to close of escrow, or a minimum of 20 days before or after contract acceptance, but before closing usually. So you've got 20 days that it has to be done in. Based on availability, you may not be able to get that done in the 20 days. And also be cautious about having your client do it beforehand, because if you close 6 months and 1 day afterwards, that's invalid. They have to do it again. That can be $900, $600 to $900 or more, depending on the septic. So be very cautious of those timelines. And those also then after the fact, the buyer needs to certify that and send things to the state to transfer that ownership. So I'm going to stop now talking because we've got a few more minutes. Any questions or any concerns, anything you guys want to talk about? I know we ran through that really fast.
No, not on my side, not anything that I can think of yet. We just got through running through that critical dates list just the other day too. So all the little questions I had, you just answered. So.
Oh, good, good. And again, a lot of people don't use that form, and I've always used it. And when I came over to Keller Williams, nobody was using it. I thought, why are we not using this form? It's so important. It has so much information, and it's not required. But I can't imagine doing a file without it, frankly.
We're OCD, so I mean, I like to have all that in order, and being a newer agent and stuff, until it's so ingrained in there, maybe not. But until then, yeah, no, every time.
Exactly. Well, and also if you have a question, like I know what you can cure and what you can't, but as a new agent, you may not. So that little CN that says you can issue a cure notice can be so valuable, because other agents, believe it or not, don't know their contract, surprisingly enough. And they're not going to know whether you can issue one or not. So you may call them and say, hey, if I don't get that form today, I'm going to have to issue a cure notice. They're going to say, what do you mean? That's, you can't do that. And you then know you can. They're going to try to bully you a little bit because they don't understand their contract. So they're not going to assume that you know yours.
Yeah.
Yeah. So lots of stuff there. Anything else? We got to, Tess just, she can't talk because she's in a place where she can't talk, but she loves that document. Yeah. Me too. Like I said, it's one of my very favorites. I can't imagine not having it. And again, it'll be updated as the contract changes. We are going to see some changes this next year. Or this year, it is 2021 already. There are going to be some changes to probably employment agreements, to our purchase contract, to the Binzer, I'm trying to think what other things. I'm on the forms committee. There's going to be some changes this year. And again, I don't think there's a lot of timeline changes, so this form may not change too much, but there will be a lot of changes to forms this year based on DOJ regulations.
Toward the end of the year, is that kind of at the beginning of the year?
Well, right now, the Department of Justice issued some requirements to the brokerages to change some practices, and it hasn't gone into effect yet, but it's going to, it's going to affect how some disclosures on the buyer side and things like that. Right now it's in a public, I don't know what you call it, public scrutiny period. What is that called? Yeah. And so that's about up. I think it's up on the 20th of this month. So tomorrow? Yeah. And then it's going to go back to Department of Justice, who's going to issue something to NAR, who's going to issue something to all of us. That's going to take effect immediately, of course. There will probably be some stuff that we have to do at MLS. I'm on the board of directors there. So we're scrambling. We're trying to have contingency plans in place based on what may happen, but we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But whatever it is going to be immediate. So it will change your listing agreements, probably your buyer broker agreement, some disclosures and things like that.
Good thing I'm not too familiar with them. It won't be that bad.
Right. And again, that's one of the only thing that's constant in real estate is change. I mean, frankly, forms are going to change based on the number of lawsuits primarily. That is what changes our forms almost every single time. So where the litigation happens, that's going to be a form revision. And again, fair housing, I think we're going to look at some changes with that. People have been pretty complacent about that. And there's a lot of things happening in our world right now that are going to impact that. I think we're going to see some other changes on listing agreements, more of a standardized form. Right now, each board in the country pretty much can use their own, at least in Arizona, can use their own listing agreement. So your listing agreements can vary and the criteria can vary from board to board. So down in, for instance, in Sierra Vista, which we serve, they have a different listing agreement than we have up in Tucson with TAR. Same within Phoenix or Gila Valley and all these boards that I have to be a member of and manage. Each one of those is different and has different criteria. The state is finalizing one that is good for the entire state if we can get everybody on board with that. And then it's consistent throughout the entire state. And I'm hoping that that gets approved.
Yeah.
Just makes it easier. So, well, it looks like we're almost out of time here.
Thank you very much.
Anybody have anything else they want to add? Or I know we ran through that really fast and we kind of scrambled a little. Nothing? Okay, well, thank you all so much. Good luck with your real estate career. I think you're going to be all fantastic and wish you all the best.
Same to you.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Lisa.
You're welcome. Bye.